Hey everybody, today I'm going to show you how you can decrypt traffic on your network to make it more secure, which I realize might sound a little strange. After all, we use encryption specifically for security. Encryption is, after all, how we verify that a machine is who they say they are. It's how we know that we're not talking to a bad guy who might be intercepting our traffic in the middle. And it's how we keep bad guys who might be listening in from getting a hold of our sensitive information. We encrypt it. The problem is that when bad guys try to hack their way into our systems, those hacks get encrypted too, and they can compromise our machines and ultimately allow those attackers access to the sensitive information that we were trying to protect with encryption in the first place. Every year, more and more of what's said on the internet is getting encrypted, and if you don't know what that encrypted traffic is saying, you're putting yourself at greater risk of attack. For example, let's take a look at something that's been in the news. There was a set of vulnerabilities discovered in Microsoft Exchange servers, commonly referred to as proxy logon. We're going to take a look at CVE 26855 specifically here. Now basically, how Exchange works is that it's an email server on the web. A client comes along and asks to see its mail over HTTPS, and the Exchange server forwards that request onto one of many back-end resources. Which resource it goes to depends on a cookie called BE resource, which routes the request to the correct resource so it can retrieve the mail and send it back to the client. So if an attacker came along, they could tailor their request to include the cookie and specify the wrong resource. So when the request got sent to Exchange, it got forwarded on to the wrong place. And from there was a lot of things they could do, including exploiting another security vulnerability that got discovered around the same time, CVE 27065. That allowed them to actually write files to the Exchange server. In many cases, it was a web shell. A web shell is basically a backdoor that they could use later to send harmful instructions to the server and do all kinds of stuff. Now, the core issue with trying to catch this is that what separates a good request from a bad request is the headers. And since these requests are generally made over HTTPS where the headers are encrypted, even if you're monitoring with the best of the best, when those requests come in over the wire, you're not going to know whether they're bad unless you can decrypt and see the headers. Now, ExtraHop actually has a built-in detector for this, so as long as you're decrypting and ExtraHop can see those headers, it'll let you know anytime this shows up on your network. Okay, now let's take a look at a database example with a brute force attack. This sort of attack is a little more generic and can happen over any database protocol, so which one isn't important? It's pretty much the oldest trick in the book, where an attacker literally just starts guessing every single password possible, trying to gain access to a database. But since all these attempts are encrypted, you don't know exactly what's going on. Now, it's important to note, at this point, you do know something's up, probably. I mean, if you see a ton of short-lived connections to a database, you can probably guess that something is going on. But with decryption, not only can you immediately confirm that these are failed logins, but you can also see the user account that the attacker is targeting. And with this information, you can go to the database and lock that user account. And because this is an attack on your database, you probably know that this attack is behind your firewall inside of your network, so you probably need to go to that machine and lock it down right away. Another thing that you can do with this information is actually go to the user who that user account belongs to and ask them whether or not their credentials might have been compromised. Finally, let's take a look at a possible SSRF attack that can happen in AWS environments, sometimes called an IMDS proxy. So on EC2 instances, there's a service called IMDS that serves metadata to the instance. The instance sends a request to this link local address, and the service responds with instance metadata, including the credentials of any IAM role that is attached to the instance. That's really important because with those credentials, you can effectively do anything that the role has permission to do. And this has led many attackers to try to pull that info off of EC2 instances. They'll send a request to the instance and try to proxy it back to the IMDS service. For example, they can include a host header that specifies that link local address. There are a number of ways that they might be able to achieve this, but if they succeed, that request will get proxied back to the IMDS service, and it will retrieve potentially those IAM credentials that they're trying to get. This was a common enough attack that AWS went out of its way to prevent it when they implemented IMDS v2. v2 doesn't just let you send any old request back to IMDS, it'll get rejected. First, you have to request an authentication token, and to do that, you have to specify how long you want that authentication token to last. After that, the service responds with an authentication token and sends it back to you. Then, when you make a request to the service, you have to specify that authentication token you got. Only after that will IMDS give you the information that you asked for. Now, what this means is that attackers have to include one of those headers in every request that gets proxied back to IMDS. either the header that retrieves the token or the header that includes the token that they got. And again, the problem with trying to detect these is that even when monitoring with the best of the best, when those requests come in over the wire, those headers are going to be encrypted. If you want to tell a good request from a bad request, you're going to have to decrypt them so you can see the headers. And again, ExtraHop being the best at what it does, it's always on the lookout for these headers with a built-in detection that'll let you know if it ever sees this kind of stuff on your network. And so how do we do this? How do we set up decryption with ExtraHop? Well, the best way to do this is with session key forwarding, which supports perfect forward secrecy for protocols like TLS 1.2 and 1.3, and it also supports non-PFS cipher suites as well. To set it up, you install a lightweight agent on a server that you want to monitor, and then every time the agent observes a session key, it forwards that key onto the ExtraHop. So when a bad guy initiates an attack, ExtraHop sees the malicious traffic on the wire and applies the session key that it got from the server and is able to decrypt that traffic to let you know that something suspicious is going on. And if you have an F5, the process is even simpler. With an F5, you don't need the session key forwarder, and instead you can configure an I rule to send the session keys to the ExtraHop. So, on to the important question that every security engineer watching this video is no doubt asking: what happens to the keys afterwards? By default, ExtraHop will store session keys for a brief time to support TLS session resumption. Keys are stored in memory only, and after the cache allocated for session keys fills up, ExtraHop will override existing keys to make room for new ones. But if you've set up an ExtraHop trace appliance to store your packets, you have two options. The default is to just discard the keys at the same time as before, after the cache fills up, and the other is to forward the keys onto the packet store. The advantage to that is that at some point in the future, if you decide you want to do some additional forensics with something like Wireshark, you can forward the keys onto Wireshark along with the packets and decrypt those packets for further analysis. If you do store your keys on a trace appliance, the keys will exist on the packet store for as long as the packets do. Once the appliance fills up and needs to make room for new packets, the keys are destroyed along with the packets. So whether you're working with AWS or Windows or databases or all three and everything in between, decrypting your network traffic with ExtraHop can help keep it all safe. Links to ExtraHop documentation are included below if you want to learn more about setting up decryption in your environment. Thanks for watching.